So we are recording this workshop. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon on this cold weather. My name is Olga St. Pierre. I am a real estate agent with Keller Williams Real Estate right here in our community. And I wanted to welcome you to our workshop this month where we are talking about a very important subject. Unfortunately, not many people want to think about it. However, funeral planning is extremely important. So I wanted to introduce Kathleen to our workshop attendees. Kathleen, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your company so that way we can get started and then we'll go from there?
Sure. So I am a licensed funeral director. I've been licensed since 2016. However, I've been working in my family funeral home since I was in high school, working the door, handing out prayer cards. My grandparents started in 1945, officially opened in 1946. My grandpa was actually a race car driver first and got in a bad accident. My grandmom said, you know, you can't do that ever again. And so when he was in a body cast for all these months back then, you could study for mortuary school with just your books. So he ended up going, after he had studied, he went to Eccles down in the city, which no longer exists, but found a funeral home and opened it up. And him and my grandma, who was actually a nurse anesthetist, I can't even say that word very greatly, but she actually went and got her funeral director's license as well. They ran that business until the 70s, and that's when my dad took over. My grandma still did the books even after that. But my grandpa died in early 80s. He had heart issues. So then it was really just my dad and my grandma. And then when my mom and dad got married in 88, my mom started helping my father run the business. My dad obviously got involved into politics. So then mom was really the main person there, where dad ran back and forth. And then I started helping and got involved. And we've just been there for so long, and so many families in the community really depend on us and just know to call one of us when that type of situation happens. So I felt like I couldn't be the kid that said, oh no, we're just gonna, you know, sell the family business. I'm not gonna do this. Because it is really, it's a 24/7 job. I mean, it's, you know, Christmas, Thanksgiving, it doesn't matter what day it is. I mean, you're on call and you got to pick up that phone and be there for that person. And it can be emotionally taxing. It can be tiring, but at the same time, my dad always told me, you know, Case, they only get one funeral. That's it. We got to make sure that it goes perfectly. They might get married more than once, but they only get one funeral. So you got to make sure you do it right.
Absolutely. Well, I have a list of questions here for you that I figured we'll start. And this is a new topic for me. So I kind of brainstormed, you know, my parents are getting older. And one of the things that I really want to know is how to prepare for someone's end of life. And I think this is important. So as me being a daughter, right, and a granddaughter, how can we as families prepare? What can we do ahead of time so that way we are not kind of caught in, you know, with nothing, with no planning?
Sure. So I will give you one thing that my family does. My mom has a binder, and in that binder has all the information of everything that I would need to settle when she passed away, for information like their lawyer's information, financial information, banks that they have, things that they own that are in their name, because those are all things that you're going to have to settle when that person passes. And you can settle them before. I mean, you know, if you would like to take the car out of mom's name and put it in your name before she even passes away. So that's one less thing you have to deal with at that time. I mean, there are things that you can do prior. But my mom and dad are still well. So they have a binder. So if God forbid something happens to them, I know where the binder is. I get the binder. I know the people I need to get in touch with, and everything's set up so I can handle all that. Another really good thing to do is make pre-arrangements. Even if you don't pay for them, making pre-arrangements at least it's like kind of like setting a blueprint for what you want, what that person would like. Also, making pre-arrangements is really smart financially, because what it does is, say if you come in to Tomlinson Funeral Home and You pick out what you want, your casket or urn or whatever funeral services you would like to do, and you pay for it that day. That locks in the price. So if you pass away 20 years from that point, it doesn't cost your family anymore, except as far as funeral expenses, except for like things that aren't our costs, like a newspaper notice. I don't control the newspaper's prices. So if your mom put away or dad put away $300 for an obituary, but it's $500 by the time they pass, so you just owe that extra $200. So cash advance items, things we can't control, those you have to, we do like a rough estimate, and so you're only paying really the difference of what ends up going up, but the funeral costs are they don't go up. They are set in stone. That's it. That's one financial benefit from making pre-arrangements and paying for your funeral, because you lock in the funeral home's price. Because obviously, like everything else, prices go up over the years. So doing that is actually really financially smart. And also, if you can't afford to pay for it right then and there, I have a woman every month, she sends her pre-arrangement check. And as soon as she pays it off, boom, that'll lock in that price and she's good to go. So definitely pre-arrangements are probably the best thing you can do, because I've actually seen it's also really good for families who can't seem to agree. How can you argue with the person who laid this out and this is what they want? That way it kind of eliminates a lot of fighting between families too. So it's also very useful in that way.
All right, great. So let's dive into some general costs. Like, I have no idea what it takes and how much it costs to plan a funeral. Can you give us some ideas in terms of, in general, right? Like, what are some of the options? I know that there's a difference between burial versus cremation. Like, what are we talking about? Maybe ballpark, if you can give us some ideas.
Sure. So cost really comes down to so many things. It comes down to the funeral home you choose. It comes down to whether you are being buried or cremated. It comes down to the fact if you've already, so a lot of families have graves that are already bought. So they're just paying for an opening fee. They're not paying for the whole grave. It really depends on your situation. A direct cremation can cost anyway from $1,500 to $3,000, depending on the funeral home, depending on the county you pass away in. Like Bucks County charges you $50 to get coroner's authorization to be cremated. Philadelphia doesn't. If you want to have a memorial service, that obviously costs more, because then you're using the funeral home, you're buying an urn, you're paying a priest to say some, or any type of religious person to say some words. It really just depends on what you want. Obviously, burial is more expensive because then you're paying for a grave opening, you're paying for a vault, you're paying for a casket, you're paying for embalming, you're paying for dressing, you're paying for cosmetology.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me? The phone froze. So can you repeat how much a funeral costs? I heard up until the cremation part.
Sure. It depends. It really depends on the funeral home, and it depends on what you choose. But a cremation can cost anywhere from $1,500 to $3,000, depending on if you have a memorial service or not, or the funeral home. Like my funeral home has less expensive cremation costs than maybe a funeral home in a different county. It really depends on where you are. To where burial is, I mean, if I had to guess, depending on the funeral home again, you're looking between $5,000 and $10,000, maybe upwards of $10,000, depending on the casket. If you choose a $7,000 casket, I mean, it's going to be more expensive. So it's really about your choices, where you are, and what you want and what your family wants. And that's why I always encourage people, just get a life insurance policy just for your funeral costs. Go make pre-arrangements, get a life insurance policy, and that way the kids just have to go to the funeral home, pick the day and time, fill out, get the death certificate to get the policy, and you're done. And then it's all taken care of. That's the easiest way, or pre-arrangements where it's already paid for and taken care of.
I'm just curious, for the burial, do you pay for your spot one time, or is this something that has to be paid for the lifetime?
So you buy a plot, and this also depends on the cemetery too, but you buy a plot, whether that is 6 graves or 8 graves or 2 graves, it depends.
Mhm.
And then each time you open one of those graves, you pay a fee. So
Right.
you pay to purchase the plot and then you pay for an opening fee.
And is that something you do outside of life insurance? Like you're supposed to pay for that up front instead of your life insurance covering it?
We recommend that you just, we tally that into your cash advance items. So if the opening fee right now is $2,000, we put away $2,000 on that contract so that that's what it is. And then if it goes up at that point, you'd obviously have to pay that difference. But usually the funeral home writes the check so that you're not writing checks to all these different people. You're writing a check to one person, the funeral home. We write the check to the cemetery that opens the fee. We write the check to the priest who does the service. We write the check to the florist who does the flowers. We pay all that week for you so that you're not worried about all that stuff. You're not doing all that and wondering, oh gosh, because sometimes life insurance doesn't come in overnight. I mean, you're waiting for that to come. So we take care of all that on the contract, and then we get reimbursed obviously through the life insurance or through your pre-arrangement.
Who do you buy the insurance policy from?
That's up to you guys totally. I mean,
Like
whichever.
who would I even think of asking?
We work with
Sun Life
Prudential,
or-
we work with MetLife, we work with State Farm, we've worked with bunches of insurance companies.
So you're talking
Eh.
about just a standard life insurance policy?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Usually, I would think, as long as you're not going to be completely extravagant, I would say $15,000 is a great thing, a great number, I would say. If you want to have a full burial, a luncheon, flowers, obit, everything, $15,000 should be able to cover all of that, where your kids aren't pulling any money out of their pocket, and you should be okay.
What if you don't qualify for a life insurance policy?
Then I would recommend that you, go ahead, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
I
off.
was gonna say, I just don't qualify anymore. I've had heart surgery and so they just won't even touch me.
Right. I'm sorry about that. I hope you're okay.
Yeah, fine.
Well, then I would recommend coming into the funeral home, making pre-arrangements, and then setting up a payment plan where you send a certain amount each month to start to pay that off.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually like the idea that you can, I personally think that it's a good idea just to visit a funeral home and get a binder or information pamphlet on what's involved, right?
Sure.
And that way you can get an idea on how much it's going to cost. So that way you can either set that money aside or you can, do the pre-arrangements and go on that payment plan. So that way the family's
Right.
not blindsided. at the
And
end.
I will say this, if you make pre-arrangements with Tomlinson Funeral Home and you gave us $10,000 for your funeral and that's all set in stone, and something happens to our funeral home and we close down and we don't operate anymore, some other funeral home is going to take over that pre-need. That money does not go away. That money is in a trust. It is safe. You do not have to worry about it. So if we close down and we find we pick a funeral home to take over our pre-needs, your pre-need is there. You might not like that funeral home. You're welcome to take that pre-need somewhere else. If you say, Tomlinson shut down, I don't like Hoffman, I want to go to Doherty. That money goes anywhere you want it to go. So don't think that if you make pre-arrangements with Tomlinson or this one or that one, that if you change your mind, you can take that money elsewhere. So your money's safe no matter what.
All right, so I'm still confused in regards to my question. So let's say that I want to plan the coffin I'm going to have and all of that beforehand, but I don't have the money to pay for it. However, I do have life insurance for if something like this happens. How
Right.
would you handle it then? Like, how would anybody know what my plans are if I haven't paid for it up front? Like, I don't want to end up paying for it twice, is what I'm saying.
Oh, no, that will not happen. If you come in and make pre-arrangements, that folder sits there in a pre-arrangement folder as long as a pre-arrangement drawer, as long as your family knows that you made the pre-arrangements. They just have to say, Mom made pre-arrangements, we pull that. Usually we have a copy of your life insurance policy, just in case the kids can't find it. We always ask for that just so that they, or whoever's taking care of your funeral has that information as well. And then we walk them through that process so that they can apply for that We get the death certificate for them. So you need a death certificate to get life insurance. So you can put things down on paper without even paying. I mean, no, if you
Okay.
just want to go and say, this is what I want, you can do that.
Okay, and I'll just ask one more question, then the other people go, because it's been on my mind for years. Do you have caskets that like bugs and stuff? I know it sounds crazy, but that bugs and stuff can't get into it, and if so, how expensive do they run?
Yes, that's called a sealed casket. Bugs, water, nothing can get in those caskets. They are a little bit more expensive, but you get a sealed casket for like $2,000 or $3,000. It's really not that crazy. Or you don't even need a casket that's sealed. You can just get a sealed vault, which is, I think, $2,000. And then you're totally protected because your casket goes inside a vault. So if you get a sealed vault, you're covered. So there's ways to save money there. You don't necessarily have to get a sealed casket and a sealed vault. You can just get the sealed vault and you're good.
What's the sealed vault?
Sealed vault is a concrete container they put in the ground when you're buried. I don't know if many of you would notice this, but sometimes when you go to the grave, you'll see like a lid, a concrete lid off to the side. Sometimes it has a crucifix on it, a name. That's the top of the vault. And they put that on top, seal it shut so that no dirt, no water, no bugs, no nothing can get to you. You are perfectly preserved for the rest of time, which is the way I want to go. Just saying.
Are people buried with their jewelry?
Yes.
Okay,
And
good.
we that's the last question we ask families before we close the casket. Is there anything you would like? Do you want mom's wedding ring? Do you want mom to stay with her wedding ring? Do you want this necklace? Do you want this watch? Some people take everything because they want to pass it down to children or grandchildren. And some people say, nope, mom loved her wedding ring. Mom and dad were married for 70 years. She's never taken it off. This has to go with her.
But that could
And-
be in the pre-arrangements if we want to be buried with something, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
We can write everything down. I had a woman bring me hair color, her outfit, her nail polish, her makeup, everything. This is what she wanted, a whole box. Stuffed animals she wanted in with her. I mean, everything. You can plan it down to the littlest detail.
Kevin, you had a question?
Yes, I do. So I told my wife that, if when I pass, I want the simplest, I want to cremate it. My instruction is take my ashes and my son's ashes up to Alaska. Is there something she needs to do before, I don't want her to go to the airport and he says, oh no, you can't bring that on board. What's the process for that?
Nope, you can take cremains on board with you. You can actually ship them through the mail as well. It sounds crazy, but you can take cremains right on board with you. I would call I always tell my families, if you're taking cremains on an airline, call that airline specifically, ask them what their protocols are.
Yeah.
But usually you're allowed to just take them in your carry-on and they can come with you.
Okay. Yeah, because my rules are simple. I told my wife, and my daughter, fly first class to Alaska, spread me and my son's ashes up there.
Right. Now I will say this, I've also experienced, I had a gentleman just like you come in, I want very simple cremation. I don't even want a memorial service, take my ashes. Well, when he passed away, his wife didn't want that.
Yeah.
So she changed everything. And she's the one that's living and breathing. So I need to listen to her. That's his next of kin. That's the one who's in charge. And in her world, she couldn't, it wasn't comfortable for her. She didn't want her husband cremated. She wanted him in a casket. She wanted to know that he was fully intact. And that's the way that she wanted to remember him. She just couldn't grieve in the way that cremation was okay for her. And I see that with a lot of people. To where my generation is more like, oh, just, we just get cremated, cremate this, cremate that. And I tell people when you're making that decision, like for example, my grandmom wanted to be cremated. My mom just couldn't do it. It didn't make her feel comfortable. It would have made her grieving process harsher, to wrap her head around, I guess you could say. she felt better knowing her mom was laying next to her dad, fully intact, and that's the way she was going to stay. And so it really, another thing you have to ask yourself is, you might be comfortable with one thing, but you need to ask your children and those who are left behind what makes them the most comfortable and how best they'll be able to grieve and deal with that situation at the time.
Yeah, I perfectly understand that part. It's just that, if they want to do something else, I'm okay with that. My wish is just keep it simple, keep the expenses down,
Right.
and just take 2 of our ashes and that's my wish. Now, if they don't fulfill it, there's nothing I could do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
Because when you're there, you don't have a choice.
Right. The best
So I
you can
understand
do
that.
is write it down. I mean, hopefully most people do fulfill those wishes though. It's just sometimes other people, I'll never, like, this is a silly example, but my dog passed away and I couldn't cremate my dog. I couldn't do it. He was my baby. I don't have any children, so I just couldn't sleep at night. I tried to. I ended up waking up my boyfriend in the middle of the night saying, you got to call the vet and tell him not to do it. I can't possibly live with that, knowing that happened. So it really depends on the people left behind. But most of the time, people do fulfill your wishes.
So just one more comment. And we did cremate my son, but I couldn't go to this crematory.
Right.
I just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
I ended up skipping the part he wrote alone. So,
Well, he's not alone, and I wouldn't recommend anybody do that. In the Indian culture, that is part of their culture where they go to the crematory, they need to press the button, and there are certain funeral homes that are set up for that, but
okay.
I would not recommend that. Trust me, especially the gentlemen that work for me and transfer decedents from the hospital to the funeral home or the funeral home to the crematory, they treat every single person like that is their brother, sister, mother, father, with the utmost respect. And we ensure families of that. And I'm sure every funeral home does. I mean, we take it very seriously. We know that that is someone to somebody, and you really that needs to be at the forefront of being in this business. My dad says, if you lose compassion and you get burnt out, you have no business doing this anymore, because this might be the first time for that family. You might have done 200 funerals this year, but this is their first one. So you need to make sure you remember that and you treat people accordingly. And we stand by that big time.
Thank you.
Kimberly has a question if you want to unmute yourself.
Hello. My question is, you said that, of course, to let your family know your wishes if you pass away, and if they're not comfortable with your wishes, that possibly they'll do what they want to do. So my kids are all teenagers, and I'm not that old, but I do have health conditions. And should I talk with my kids and ask them what they would want for me if I would pass away and go with their wishes?
I think teenagers are a little young to ask that question. I don't know if I would have known how I would have buried my mom or dad if something had suddenly happened to them. So I think you decide what you want and how you think, knowing your children, how you think they would best deal with your passing. Whether they would feel better if you were in an urn in the home with them, or if they would feel better being able to go to a grave and be able to place flowers for Mother's Day or Christmas or whatever it is. I think you make your best judgment as of right now as to what you think they would want. And then maybe years from now, revisit it and say, by the way, my pre-arrangements are at so-and-so. This is my plan. Are you all comfortable with that? And then go from there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Brandy, you had a question?
Yes. So I'm not clear yet. If I make a plan and I pass away, does anybody have the authority to then change my plan? Because I'm concerned about that.
So what I mean by change your plan is saying, like, if you wanted to be cremated and instead they want to bury you, that would be the only thing they can necessarily change. Or they could say, we want to see her first before she's cremated. We want to have a viewing prior to the cremation process. So, I mean, if you're really, really set on I want to be cremated or I want to be buried and don't you dare change it. You put that in a will, have an executor that you know is going to follow out your wishes no matter what.
Okay, and
But
is
they can't do, like, say if you want to do if you put in pre-arrangements for like a burial, they can't say, oh no, now we're going to cremate you so we get those thousands of dollars back. You know, that can't happen. They can change it as far as, you know, do extra to the services, like we want to do a viewing before a cremation, but they can't just say, you know what, mom wanted this big extravagant funeral, we don't want to do that, so we're going to take the money and go and just cremate her. You can't do that. So don't worry about that.
okay, and are tombstones extra fees?
Yes, that's a whole separate fee. And the funeral home can work with you on that. We don't charge you to do that. We just work with you, and we're kind of like the middleman. My mom does it a lot. She works with a headstone company, but she's the one that sits down with the families and makes sure the sketch is right and kind of walks you through the process. But there's no charge for that. You just pay that headstone company their fee. No charge on the funeral home end. At least not for our funeral home. I don't know how other funeral homes work, but we don't. My mom does that. Same with pre-arrangements. You come in for pre-arrangements, we don't charge you a dime. And same with headstones. We don't get paid unless you pass away. That's it.
All right, Don and Barb, you guys had a question. If you want to unmute yourselves. You need to unmute
Barb,
yourself.
unmute
Don.
again.
I'm sorry, I thought I did. It didn't click. I don't know if it still is or not, but there used to be rules and regulations about where you could scatter ashes. Is that still?
There is. You're not just supposed to go scatter ashes anywhere. Do people do it? They do. But I can't stop somebody from doing something after they leave the funeral home. That's kind of where funeral directors are. I mean, I've known people to take them to the beach and scatter ashes. I mean, technically, it's not really dangerous for anyone. It's just ashes. They have no DNA. They have nothing. I mean, you can't really get anything from ashes, but they have regulations on where you can scatter them and how. And, you know, they have a boat. You're supposed to have the coordinates and everything if you take them to the ocean. But most of the time, people make their own choices. I'll say that.
Well, where would you go to find out these rules and regulations?
It depends on where you want to scatter. Then you would, so if you want to scatter at a park, you would have to get in touch with that park ranger or whoever runs that park, you know, those kind of things.
Okay. And the other question is, you said that if you want to be buried and the family changes it to be cremated, they can't get the money. Where does the money go?
So your money's in a trust, and
Right.
See, the issue with that is that I guess they found that a lot of families were, instead of following out these people's wishes, they were just taking the money for financial purposes and not doing. So that's just a contract agreement. That's what from the funeral home to the person making the pre-arrangements. I'm making a promise, and you can't just switch this down and just try and make money off of that, because technically if you've paid in full, that money, it gains interest so that the funeral home can cover the same cost 20 years from the time that you make those pre-arrangements. So, I mean, that's more of a contract type of agreement.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, if you decide to cremate the person that's paid in full for a big full-blown funeral, where does the money go that's left over?
You just can't do it. In the contract, you can't do it. You can have a viewing and everything and then cremate, so they would get their money back for like the cemetery, but you can't pull apart the whole entire funeral arrangement. Like you can't.
So in other words, the funeral home keeps the money.
You would get back what the cemetery costs were, but the funeral home is entitled to what they put away all this time. Yeah.
Okay.
Does that money actually go in a legal trust of some kind?
Yes, you cannot get that money unless you have a death certificate. Unfortunately, we had a funeral director in the area who was forging death certificates and took out pre-need money. But I mean, other than that, you cannot touch that. Nobody can touch that money unless you have a death certificate.
What about Medicaid? let's say a person had to go on Medicaid. I understand that the government can come back and they can try to get certain, like life insurance, or if they still owe money, maybe a trust insulates them from that.
No, that's actually a reason why a lot of people make funeral arrangements, because nursing homes can't touch that. They're not
Okay.
allowed to touch that money for your funeral.
Okay,
Or
good.
life insurance that's used for a funeral.
Is that the same with the Medicare look back?
I'm not familiar with Medicare look back.
Well, they got 5 years and they can look at any expenses you have, any gifts you give to people for 5 years before you went on Medicaid, to make sure you're not just, let's say you had $1 million and you gave it all to your kids the day before
Right.
you had to go in the hospital, and they're not going to let you get away with that. But I think
Never
there's
heard of
certain
that.
kind of trust.
I have to ask, my mom's really good at the whole Medicare and, making
Yeah.
sure that
I'm sure you see
people
that.
aren't getting money taken from them from the nursing home and stuff like that. So I'd have to get back to you on that question, because I've never heard of Medicare look back.
Yeah, if
That's
you can
bad,
find
though.
out, let me know, then I can forward that
Sure.
information. So let's say that that the husband and wife team put aside $15,000 for each, right? They make the pre-planning. And what happens is they wanted to go into a senior living community. Medicare look back as they look to see how much of the assets that the husband and wife had was given away or transferred to others, and whether that $15,000 per person is considered those assets that they
Yeah.
can be used against.
So we'll get a lot of nursing homes that literally ask for proof of our pre-need contract, so that they know that that's where that money's headed. So then they
Okay.
can't mess with it.
Yeah, Barb and Don, I think that's the answer, is that if they get
Yeah.
proof that there's a contract made for pre-planning, then they're not going to touch that. But if you can double check on that, that would be appreciated.
Sure.
They're not giving it
Thank you.
away, they're buying something.
Right.
Right, exactly. And my question is to add on to the trust that you were mentioning. Let's say that the pre-planning is made and the person paid $15,000 for their funeral arrangements, and the funeral home goes bankrupt, right? They go under. How
That
does
money's still protected. It's totally
Okay.
separate from the funeral home. The only thing on that trust that has anything to do with us is that we're the funeral home you're going to. It just has our name there. We have no access to it, nothing. We send your check in, we
Mhm.
get a statement every month that, this is who, or, for people who pay,
Mhm.
this is how much Carol's paid into her pre-arrangement, but we literally have zero access to that money unless we send a death certificate into that bank. Bank has total control.
So that bank also is going to provide contact information if the funeral home goes bankrupt, right? So that way the family or.
Like I said, Tomlinson Funeral Home could close down tomorrow,
Mhm.
and you could call Doherty or any other funeral home and say, I have a pre-need trust. It was through Tomlinson, but now they're bankrupt. I need my funeral. My mother passed away. They would still be able to access that money. Any
Got it.
funeral home can access that money with a death certificate.
Okay, got it. Okay, go ahead, Brandy. Do you have a question, Brandy? Kevin, go ahead, Kevin.
So you brought up an interesting point. One of the things I worry about is that as I get older, I'm gonna need more care. And one of the things I can't predict is nursing home. And one of the things I'm trying to protect is how much of the money stays, so if I prepay, if I understand you correctly, if I prepay my funeral expenses, nursing home can't touch that.
Correct.
That's-
All they'll ask is for a contract that you have that money put away for a funeral, and that's it.
Okay. Because one of my concerns is, that I'm disabled and I need long-term care and all my money's gone, and all suddenly now my daughter has to
Pay for your,
pay for
yes.
it.
And that
I just don't
happens.
want that to happen.
Yeah, that happens more than not, unfortunately, because, and usually it's in a situation where something's happened suddenly. Someone's gotten in an accident or had a sudden heart attack and they just weren't expecting. I had a gentleman who literally went overseas with his family and had a heart attack the first day they got there, passed away over there. And they had to get him all the way back here. And it was just a horrible, horrible situation. So that's why I tell everyone, if you can go into any funeral home, whichever you're choosing, and make pre-arrangements, make payments, or pay it in full of what you want, and leave that for your children and say, when I pass away, you called this funeral home. And the only thing they will literally have to do is go in there, pick a day and time of services, and that's it. We do everything else. They just have to make a few decisions as far as when they want the services, how they want it done, what kind of flowers they want, how many death certificates they want. And that's where that binder I brought up earlier comes into play. You know, when you sit down and I say, how many death certificates do you want? A lot of people look at me and say, oh, I don't know. And I say, well, how many bank accounts does mom or dad have? 3. Same bank? Okay, then you need 1 death certificate. How many vehicles does mom and dad have? 1 vehicle in their name. Okay, that's a death certificate. You know, the house, is the house still in mom and dad's name? Okay, you're gonna need a death certificate for that. There are certain things you need death certificates for in order to change that over into somebody else's name or sell the property or whatever it may be. So that's another thing you want to put down there and make sure that your kids know. You got to call Tomlinson Funeral Home or whatever funeral home when I pass away. And by the way, these are the things that are still in my name that I still own. So that way they know what they need to handle. That's where I find the most frustrating thing for people is that sometimes they're searching through a house just to figure out what mom and dad have, what they own. And that is, especially when you just lost your parents or somebody you really love, that is not what you want to be doing at that point. I mean, you really just are barely making it through your days, just trying to, you know, deal with this. And the last thing you want to be doing is scrummaging through files and stuff that you don't understand or know much about. So certainly list everything that's still in your name, or a lawyer who would have all that information, and put the money aside and just tell them what funeral home to go to. And
It's a good thing you brought that up. It's a good thing you brought that up because I noticed when I try to have a conversation with my daughter, she get that discomfort feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't want to think about that.
So, you know, so I want to be prepared for all these things so she's going to have enough emotional things. And so your information is very educational. Thank you.
Of course, of course.
And you know what, I think
Great,
that offers something that I talk in all of our senior workshops with people is that you need to have a face-to-face conversation with your family on what your wishes are, right? Do you want to be cremated? Do you want to be buried? What kind of things that you're looking for, and then write everything down and have that in a binder, or have that, you know, my parents have like all their stuff in their safe in their house.
Right.
And, you know, they told me everything that you need is there.
Right.
And, you know, it's everything that you need. And that's one of the things we start out with is have the conversation and talk about who they need to contact, or the list of accounts, emails, passwords, right? Like we have a whole like digital asset and cheat sheet that we can provide with people. So that way you have an idea. And yeah, these are very uncomfortable conversations, but I think ultimately it's actually helping the family to deal with this better, right? And to honor the wishes.
Yeah, I just think, and I've seen it, there's nothing worse than losing a loved one and then having the stress of all of that on top of you. I can't imagine it, but I've seen people go through it, and we do everything we possibly can to help them through that situation. And we do, but unfortunately we can't go through the house and we can't do those things. I mean, we can help walk them through filing for the life insurance policy. We can walk them through, you know, finishing the estate and where they need to go and who they need to contact to do those type of things. But we can't do the hard work, which is, you know, unfortunately going through all of mom or dad's stuff to figure out. And it's kind of like a I don't even know what you would call it, but like a treasure hunt, I guess, for what you need to, you're trying to connect all the dots and you don't have anybody to guide you, and it's horrible. It's just not something you want to leave your kids to have to do.
Absolutely.
I tell my mom and dad all the time, did you update that binder? I don't want to be lost in how many years, like, is that updated? When's the last time you updated it? Because things change over years. So you certainly want to make sure you put something like that together, update it. And then, like I said, if you made pre-arrangements, the kids just have to call us, because by that point, I don't need to call the kids and say, I need mom's social, I need her date of birth, her city of birth, her parents' names, her mom's maiden name. You wouldn't believe how many people don't know their grandmother's maiden name. But like that information's all filled out when you make the pre-arrangements with us. So we don't have to ask them any of those hard questions. It's already there. And then when they need that information for other things, we have it for them.
Right.
Those cheat sheets, are they available to us?
I can get that over to you, Laura.
That would be great, yeah. I was gonna say, I just want to tell you, I'm a CPA in my real life. And I've done a lot of audits on funeral homes. And how it works is I walk into a funeral home and say, I want to make a pre-arrangement, and I give them $10,000. They take the $10,000 and they send it to CIBC, which is a bank. I don't know, do you have that down there?
We use either Secure Choice or PNC Bank.
Okay, so
that we
she
use,
sends it
yeah.
to one of those banks, and the bank has the trust account.
Right,
Money is in the bank.
right,
The $10,000 to the bank. The only way to get that money back out of there is to show a death certificate.
correct.
They cannot release it. They can release it to you, or they can release it to me if you have the death certificate.
Right.
Or they can release it to the funeral home, but they can't release it for anything else other than the death certificate.
Right.
And so I just wanted you to know that. I don't think, I don't know, your government may be able to do the clawback or whatever you call that, what Don and Barb are talking about, I'm not sure. But I know that our government is not allowed to do that. You
Yeah,
can't,
nobody can touch that money.
nobody can touch that money.
Nobody can touch that money. That goes right to the funeral home when the
Yeah.
death certificate arrives.
Yeah.
Okay. Brandy, are you back because you still had a question? I understand.
I did, sorry, I'm trying
Okay,
to
no
work
problem.
at the same time and I didn't get to the mute button in time.
No problem.
So the plot itself, is that something that is also done through the funeral home, and the plot and the casket are two different fees, right?
Yeah, so the plot is obviously sold by the cemetery. Usually I recommend that you get in touch with the funeral home first before you just go to the cemetery. And then pick out a plot, pick out your graves. Unfortunately, they're very, very expensive now. Usually a lot of people have like a family plot that goes generations back and still has room for 1 or 2 people, and then you just pay the opening. So it really depends on your situation. And it depends, it's perfectly up to you. I mean, we just recommend you come to us first, make the pre-arrangements, and then we walk you through the whole process.
So per your advice, would somebody, like, should somebody figure all that out beforehand, as far as like when the life insurance comes into play? Is that something that life insurance can also handle?
Yeah, if you get life insurance for $15,000, then you can buy the plot, you still have to open the grave too. So it's 2 charges. You buy the plot and then you have to pay to open whichever grave you choose to go in. And then the casket, vault. I mean, if you're buying a plot, depending on where you buy a plot, I would recommend getting a life insurance policy for $20,000 to $25,000, because buying a plot's very expensive. The opening fee is $2,000 alone just to open the grave. So buying a plot can be very, very expensive.
All right, so if you're taking into consideration the casket, the plot, the tombstone, roughly how much does that cost?
It depends. That depends. It depends on the cemetery. It depends on how many graves you get in that plot. It depends on the casket you choose. Like I said, you can get a sealed vault without getting a sealed casket. So you could get a $1,200 casket with a $2,000 sealed vault, and it's not that bad. And you're or whatever. but the plots really depend on the cemetery. You know, it depends on which cemetery you choose.
Okay. Did anybody else have any other questions? I had all, all my questions were answered, and I'm going to look into the details on the life insurance policy, because that's something that I haven't heard. And I didn't know that a life insurance policy can actually cover funeral expenses. Is that the only type of policy that does?
Oh, no, I mean, you could, I mean, there's people that go, like, I just heard my mom on the phone the other day with someone, and they got a life insurance policy, and they made the funeral home the beneficiary. So they make sure that that life insurance policy pays for the funeral bill. That's another thing you can do. So, yeah, I mean, that's what I would recommend, because then you know that it's not going to have to come out of your children or anybody else's pocket. Nobody's going to be responsible for it. So if you don't have the money up front, I would always recommend getting a life insurance policy and getting it just for that. Or, I mean, if you have a big policy that I want so much to go to my kids, but at least there's a good chunk of $10,000 to $15,000 or $20,000 I can pay for my full funeral, or $5,000 to pay for my direct cremation and memorial service. So,
so let's hypothetically say that the family has no money, right? And it probably has happened before. There's no money whatsoever to pay, right? It can even be not even a couple $1,000s. Are there any type of services, or what can you recommend in that situation?
So if there's zero funds available, we work best as we can with the family. I mean, obviously we can't let you go have some big extravagant funeral if you don't have the means to pay for that. Because like I said, we pay for everything up front for you. So then not only do you have a situation where the funeral home might not get paid, but then they're also out $15,000 that they just paid for the person's funeral. So usually we look at what the person can handle financially monthly, and we address that as far as what they pick for what type of services they're going to have.
So it sounds like that you can make arrangements maybe for some kind of financing, right? For some kind of payment plan.
We don't like to do that, but for people in hard situations like that, like I said, a cremation usually with a memorial service, that's something that's not super, super expensive and somebody can pay off within a decent amount of time. So then we'll work with you on that. But if you want to have a big full funeral, we usually say, okay, well, if you want to have this big funeral, you need to at least cover your opening costs, like your casket costs, like things that we put out the money for. Like it's one thing if you don't pay us, but you have to be able to pay for the things that we have to pay for. So we usually say, you have to at least pay for the cash advances, things that, if I'm writing a $2,000 check to open your grave, you need to send that money back. You know what I mean? So if you can't do that, then we just can't. We used to do that all the time, because my father and mother, if you come in there and this is what you want, they want that for you too. And it ended up really not ending well for us in certain circumstances. So we had to stop that. But we do our best to work with you, because like I said earlier, you get one funeral. It really has an impact on how your family grieves and how they move forward. So we try and do everything we can to make it as painless and easy as possible.
Awesome. Kathleen, I'm going to include your contact information for everyone that is attended today, as well as with the video, right? So people can rewatch it. Anyone else has any last questions or thoughts or anything else before we wrap up today?
I share something I did. My husband wanted to be cremated, and he did a lot of woodworking, so I wanted a wooden box for him. And I got it online. And then last year I thought, I'm very healthy. I might live a long time. And I wanted a box like his. I was going to ask the kids to get it for me for Christmas, but I thought that might freak them out. So I ordered my own box. I had it engraved with my name and my birth year. And I have a box sitting on my shelf. The kids know where it is. So we'll have the same box later on when I need one.
You just tell the kids to bring that in for us, and we take care of that for them and give them a call when it's all done and give it back.
Right.
That's a great idea, Anne. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. I would recommend, though, for most people, contact your funeral director, because sometimes you order something that cremains may not all fit in. So then you have a portion of the person that's left over, and you don't really want that. So at least contact the funeral home and make sure you're getting the right size. I
Right.
would just say that. And guys, if you ever have any questions, please feel free to give my funeral home a call, Ryan Brady or Jim Menezza or my mom, Nancy Tomlinson. You can call us anytime and ask us random questions, and we will answer them for you. It is really no bother at all.
That's wonderful. All right, we're gonna wrap up unless anybody else had any other questions. No? Kathleen, thank you so much for spending an hour with us. This has been
Of
extremely
course.
helpful, very, very much helpful, very much needed, I think, for a lot of
Yeah.
us. So, and we will send everybody a copy of the recording, Kathleen's and the funeral home's contact information. And again, thank you so much for joining us again for
You're
another.
so welcome. If you ever need anything else, guys, feel free to reach out.
All right, thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.